All right, so in the last video, we learned some new techniques. We learned about smooth shading, we learned about normals, and then we applied those to create a simple smooth object, and now we have the tools to make smooth objects. So we're going to practice by making a vase. So let's start by just adding a circle. So let me turn on screencast keys. We'll go Shift A, mesh, circle, and something like, I don't know, 12 verts. It can be pretty low poly because we're going to subdivide it later. Now let's make this to scale. So S, actually let's do it like this. We're going to hit N to open the side panel, and under item, I want the base to be like, I don't know, 10 centimeters, so like 0.1 meters, and you can just enter that into the dimensions here, 0.1 m, and it will set that to the correct size. Now tab into edit mode, F to fill, and let's start making our vase. So I'm going to zoom in on this and E to extrude, and then E to extrude again, and S to scale, something like that. And I just want to make the base maybe a little bigger, so S Shift Z to scale that up. And then E and S and E and S. And I'm just extruding and scaling. And S to scale it down. And just going to keep extruding and scaling. And extrude and scale. Maybe like this sort of shape where it's like it gets more narrow and then it gets large again. Let's say just GZ to bring it up and S to scale up here. And I'm just adding loop cuts with Control R and scaling appropriately. Something like this. And I'm just eyeballing this. It doesn't have to be perfect. All right, so now we're going to delete that top face. So Alt Z to come out of the wireframe mode, select this top face, X, and we're going to delete faces only. And then we're going to do the same thing we did with the bowl. So we're going to add a solidify modifier. And I want it to be maybe a centimeter thick. So you can type 1 centimeter or 0.01 meters, maybe 2 centimeters. And you'll notice that like it's not extruding in the right direction. And that's because we forgot to apply our scale. So Control A, apply rotation and scale. And actually I'm going to go into side view so you can see it update and see what happens as we apply the rotation and scale. It will update, and now you can see that this is extruding or solidifying properly. Maybe like 1.5 centimeters thick is a good thickness. And on this modifier, there's this little drop down menu here on the right. I'm just going to click apply, or you can also hit Control A, and there we go. And now I'm going to right click and shade smooth. Now you see we get some of the same issues that we got before with the bowl. So let's go ahead and fix that using the techniques we learned. So Control R to add a proximity loop and just drag it up here towards this edge. I'll put one on the inside too. Now you can see we have a nice crease sort of around that edge there. And if we zoom in here, we can do the same thing near the bottom. Now in episode 8, I mentioned that you need to have quad topology in order to subdivide the mesh. And it's not technically true. You can subdivide a mesh that doesn't have quad topology. It's just, it's gonna mess up the topology and the shading of your model. So I'll show you what happens here if we do that. If we click on this and add a subdivision surface modifier, which is just here under the modifiers tab, add modifier, and then it's under generate near the bottom. Hopefully you can see that if I rotate here, we've got like this weird star pattern around the bottom here, and that's because we're subdividing an n-gon. So the way that we're going to fix that is by, well, there are two ways. You can either select that bottom face and inset, and now you can see we don't see that we don't see that shading issue anymore. But if I apply the subdivision surface modifier, and don't apply yours, I'm just doing this for demonstration, and then tab, you can see that star is actually still there. And the reason that we don't see it is because we now have an edge loop around it. When we did that inset, we have this around it, and so this, like these verts and the verts that make up the star, are all completely flat. So this is a planar surface. So it's essentially just reflecting all together. Therefore, we don't see the shading issues. But the problem with the topology is still there. So we're not gonna do that. So I'm just gonna Control Z to undo this, and X to delete that face, and grid fill like we did with our bowl. And there we go. You can see we no longer have that weird issue down here at the bottom. All right, so now we need to fix the one that's on the inside. So 7 to go into top view, and if you tab into edit mode, it's going to look like we can't select this face, and that's just because the subdivision surface modifier is still here. You can hide that by pushing this little picture of a computer screen here. It says real-time display and viewport. If you click that, it'll hide the subsurf for now. And then you can see that we've got this face here that is an n-gon. So this has more than 4 verts. So X to delete that face, and then into edge mode, I'm going to select the loop that it was attached to and grid fill. And bringing back the subsurf modifier, maybe putting the levels up to 2, you can see that, that it's looking not bad. So in our next video, we're going to be getting into procedural materials. So let's go ahead and get a little bit of a head start on that and give this a procedural material. So we're not going to get too in-depth here, but select your vase here and go into materials and hit new, make a new material. I'll call it vase, and then let's go into the shading tab here and let's make a material for this thing. So we're just going to make like a speckled ceramic kind of material here. What we're going to do is hit Shift A, and I'm going to add a Voronoi. So if you go into Shift A to add under texture, we have all of these different types of textures, and this is where the procedural textures live, essentially, is we're going to find them under here. The one we're looking for right now is Voronoi. And under here, and we'll talk more in detail about like how all of these work and how to use them, but for now, just go ahead and change this F1 to smooth F1. And then I'm going to also just plug that distance into the base color here. Now it's pretty small, so I'm going to drag up the scale here quite a bit. Maybe something like this. And then next I want to make essentially each of these blobs into a speck, right? And so to do that, if you look at this now, you can see that these are like pretty diffuse. They're like sort of fuzzy blobs. We can fix this by restricting the color range of this procedural texture here. And so we can do that with a color ramp node. So I'm going to hit Shift A, and I'm going to search for a color ramp. And if you just drop it here in between the Voronoi and the principled BSDF, it will automatically hook itself up into that noodle. And I'm just going to drag this black up a little bit and then drag the white down. And you can see that's really like restricting the range of this. So we've got some speckles. The next thing we want to add is some color, and then we're pretty close to finish. So I'm going to add one more node here, which is going to be a mix node. If you're using an older version of Blender, the node you're looking for is called Mix RGB. In Blender 3.4 or 3.3, I forget which version, they actually removed the Mix RGB node, and it's now just called a mix node. So Shift A, search, and let's grab Mix. And if I drop this here, now it's got this drop-down menu where it says Float, Vector, Color, and it will turn into essentially what the legacy Mix RGB node was. So I'm going to drop that here in between these two. And this color that's coming out of the color ramp, I actually want that plugged into slot B. And you can drag this noodle out by holding down Control and clicking and dragging, and it'll sort of free it from that slot, and then you can plug it in somewhere else. Now I want to do two more things here. I want to change this base color to sort of an appealing color. Maybe like a baby blue, something like that. And I'm going to change this from mix to multiply. And then let's just drag this factor up to like 0.8 maybe, something like this. And if you want the speckles to be like larger or smaller, you can just adjust that by changing the scale here. But I think something around like 25 is pretty okay. And now I'm just going to turn the roughness of this all the way down. So on the principled BSDF where it says roughness, I'm going to just bring this down to like 0. Now in episode 6, I think, we learned how to add HDRIs. So I'm going to quickly do that. Under the World tab, I'm going to add an environment texture. Oops. And locate an HDRI file and just plug that in here. And just plug that into the surface. And that's pretty much it. So if we now go back to our viewport shading mode, we can go into this rendered view. You can see this is our vase. So that's not bad. That's a, sort of a good introduction to procedural texturing, and then also practicing some of the skills that we learned in episode 8. So until next time, where we're going to learn a little bit more about procedural texturing and then getting into some sort of texture baking and then working on some more photorealistic assets.